There's a strange kind of loneliness that comes with being intelligent. It's not the kind of loneliness that comes from being alone, but from being surrounded by people who can't quite see the world the way you do. You start to notice things others don't. The tiny cracks in conversations, the hidden intentions in people's words, the way silence sometimes says more than anyone dares to admit. What should feel like a gift begins to feel like a burden. You see too much, think too much, and feel too much, and slowly, that awareness starts to isolate you from the simplicity that others seem to enjoy so easily. You can't turn it off. Intelligence becomes a kind of constant whisper in your head, analyzing, questioning, dissecting, until even peace starts to feel like another problem to solve. And then comes the quiet distance. You laugh when others laugh, but somewhere deep inside, you know you're pretending. You play along, nodding through small talk, suppressing the deeper thoughts that would only make people uncomfortable. The world loves smartness when it's useful, when it wins arguments, makes money, or sounds clever, but not when it reveals uncomfortable truths. That's when people start to pull away. They call you too serious, or say you think too much. You learn to hide your depth behind polite smiles, to dim the light of your mind so it doesn't blind anyone. But deep down, that dimming hurts more than the isolation itself. For many, this feeling starts early. Maybe you were the quiet child who watched rather than joined in. The one who asked questions adults didn't know how to answer. You might remember sitting in a classroom, already aware that you were different, not better, just different. While others joked or copied each other's homework, you were lost in thoughts too big for your age. Maybe you noticed the sadness behind your teacher's eyes or the tension in your parents' voices when they thought you weren't listening. Awareness came early, and it never left. It grew with you until it became a kind of invisible lens, sharpening everything, even the pain. With time, that awareness turns heavy. You start to realize how fragile everything really is. Happiness, love, certainty. The more you understand, the harder it becomes to believe. You see through illusions that used to comfort you. You notice how much of life runs on denial. How people cling to distractions just to avoid feeling the emptiness underneath. But when you see that emptiness clearly, you can't look away. It's not depression, not exactly. It's more like waking up too soon in a world still asleep. You carry that wakefulness quietly, and it weighs on you in ways you can't explain. Carl Jung once said that what we most need to find will be found where we least want to look, in our own shadow. Maybe that's why intelligent people suffer more. They can't help but see their own shadow. They see every contradiction in themselves, the part that wants to help and the part that wants to hide, the part that longs for meaning and the part that doubts everything. Their mind is sharp enough to cut through illusion, but not soft enough to hold the pain that truth brings. So they intellectualize it, analyze it, try to reason with it, unaware that the more they think, the deeper the shadow grows. Intelligence without self-acceptance becomes self-torture. Somewhere along the way, a split begins. The mind starts living in one world, the heart in another. Logic says one thing, emotion says another, and you find yourself caught in between, unable to fully trust either. You know what's rational, yet you can't help feeling what's irrational. You can write essays on emotional intelligence, but still struggle to comfort your own heart. It's like watching yourself live from a distance, a quiet observer trapped behind the glass of your own awareness. And because you see so much, you start to freeze. You overobserve. You notice the smallest shifts in tone, the micro-expressions, the subtext of everything, until the world feels overwhelming. Every detail becomes a weight. Every decision feels like it carries cosmic importance. You analyze people's motives until you can't connect with them anymore. It's not arrogance, it's exhaustion. The brain never rests. You want to just feel, to live, to be spontaneous, but your mind keeps turning life into a math problem you can't stop solving. What's ironic is that many intelligent people are emotionally blind in ways they can't see. They can interpret philosophy, literature, or human nature, yet when it comes to their own feelings, they stumble. They can explain love, but can't surrender to it. They can diagnose everyone else's pain, but ignore their own. Emotional fluency isn't a product of intellect. It's a product of presence. And presence is exactly what a restless mind loses. So they live in theory, not experience, analyzing emotions instead of feeling them, confusing understanding with healing. Over time, this creates a quiet resentment. Not loud, not bitter, just a subtle ache. A sense that the world doesn't deserve your thoughts, that people don't really want truth, that intelligence is a curse in a society that celebrates comfort over clarity. You start to envy those who can live easily, who can talk without thinking, laugh without irony, and believe without doubt. You tell yourself they're lucky, but beneath that envy is grief. Grief for your own lost innocence. For the part of you that once believed the world made sense. And somewhere in the silence between all these realizations, a question starts to form. If being smart can't make you happy, what can? If awareness only deepens the ache, what's the point of understanding so much? Maybe happiness isn't found in knowing more, but in knowing less, or in knowing differently. Maybe the goal isn't to outthink the pain, but to outgrow the need to analyze it. Maybe wisdom begins where analysis ends, when the mind finally surrenders and life is allowed to simply be. The mind can be a beautiful place, but for the overthinker, it often becomes a prison. At first, it feels like safety, a fortress built from logic and observation. Every wall is made of understanding, every door guarded by reason. But soon, that fortress turns cold. Thoughts echo endlessly, and the very mind that was meant to protect you starts to confine you. You begin to live more in your head than in your life. You think about every possibility, every word, every glance, until reality becomes something you study, not something you live. You feel safe but never free. The mind becomes your home and your cage. Inside that cage begins the loop, the quiet, endless replay of what you said, what you didn't, what you could have done differently. You search for the perfect version of yourself inside every scenario, as if perfection could rewrite the past. But the more you analyze, the deeper you sink. The mind keeps spinning, building stories on top of stories, trying to find control in places where there is none. You start asking questions that have no answers. Why did this happen? What does it mean? What's wrong with me? And the cruelest part is that every answer you find only leads to another question. Carl Jung once described how the mind reflects itself in everything it touches, that we project our inner world onto the outer one, like a mirror facing another mirror. When you live too long in that reflection, you start to mistake analysis for experience. You read books about emotion, but rarely feel your own. You see yourself in every idea, every theory, but struggle to see yourself in life. You study human behavior as though you're not human, as though distance could save you from disappointment. But it's that very distance that keeps you lonely. The mirror keeps you safe from pain, but it also keeps you untouched by joy. For the intelligent mind, control feels like survival. If you can understand everything, maybe you can't be hurt by anything. So you tighten your grip, you plan, predict, and prepare. You overthink conversations before they happen, replay them after they end, and dissect silence like it's a code to be cracked. You become addicted to certainty. But life isn't certain, and that addiction slowly kills your ability to be spontaneous. You can't just laugh, you analyze why it was funny. You can't just love, you measure whether it's logical. The mind becomes obsessed with controlling chaos, forgetting that all beauty, art, connection, meaning, comes from the chaos it fears. You can't plan your way into being alive. Sometimes, solitude becomes a disguise. It feels like depth, like wisdom. You tell yourself you prefer being alone because you're different, more thoughtful, more self-aware. But sometimes solitude is just fear wearing sophistication's mask. You call it independence, but really it's protection. You've learned that people can't hurt you if you never let them close. You fill the silence with ideas and call it peace, but underneath the calm, there's longing, not for company, but for understanding. You want someone who can meet you in that inner world without asking you to come down from it. But that kind of connection is rare. And so you convince yourself you don't need it. The tragedy is that isolation doesn't always feel like loneliness. It feels like control. It feels clean, simple, manageable. Yet when you try to share your thoughts, something strange happens. They don't land. People nod, smile, change the subject. You start holding back, simplifying your words so they fit into smaller spaces. Over time, genuine intimacy becomes difficult. You're afraid of being seen too deeply, and even more afraid of not being seen at all. So you hover somewhere in between, close enough to be polite, distant enough to be safe. You crave connection, but can't stop scanning for danger inside it. To stay safe, you shrink your emotions. You start believing that logic is strength and feeling is weakness. You analyze instead of express. When sadness comes, you turn it into philosophy. When love comes, you study it like a text. Emotions become data, measurable, explainable, contained. You pride yourself on being calm, composed, rational. But in the silence of the night, that calm starts to feel empty. You realize that emotions don't disappear when ignored. They harden. The less you feel, the less alive you become. The heart doesn't understand your clever excuses. It only knows it's been quiet too long. Beneath that quietness hides another fear, the fear of being ordinary. For many intelligent people, uniqueness becomes identity. Being different is proof of worth. You chase ideas that no one else sees, opinions no one else shares, because blending in feels like erasure. But this need for uniqueness can turn cruel. You begin to measure every interaction by how special it makes you feel. You can't rest unless you stand apart. And yet, the more you separate yourself from others, the more you crave what you left behind, the warmth of belonging. You built your identity to be untouchable, and now you can't touch life back. In moments of honesty, there's another emotion you rarely admit: envy. You envy those who live simply, who laugh easily, who can be silly without shame. You envy the ones who don't think so much, who can stay in the moment without drowning in it. They seem free in ways your mind won't allow. You tell yourself you wouldn't trade your depth for their ignorance, but sometimes, late at night, you wonder if ignorance might be a different kind of wisdom. Maybe they've found something you've overlooked, the ability to exist without explanation. And so you reach a quiet crossroad, a door half open. You start to sense that thinking alone won't save you. That understanding is not the same as healing. Maybe the way out of the mind's prison isn't through more analysis, but through surrender. To stop dissecting and start feeling. To stop reaching for control and start trusting the chaos. Because maybe happiness isn't found in thinking, but in the rare, unguarded moments when you finally let life happen without needing to explain it. At some point, the mind begins to rule like a tyrant. It tells you what's rational, what's right, what's worth your time, and everything else is dismissed. Feelings become inconveniences, instincts become childish, and spontaneity feels dangerous. You start to worship clarity, efficiency, and control, as if they were gods of survival. The intellect sits on a throne, commanding your life like a general running a war you never agreed to fight. But this kind of rule has a quiet cost. The more power the mind claims, the less room there is for wonder, warmth, or surrender. The ruler keeps you safe, but also alone. Somewhere along the way, you begin to believe a seductive lie, that understanding equals freedom. You tell yourself, if I can just understand it, I'll be okay. Every pain becomes a puzzle to decode, every emotion a theory to refine. But the more you understand, the heavier it gets. Insight doesn't free you. It binds you to new levels of complexity. The wound doesn't heal because you've named it. It waits for you to feel it. But the mind hates that part. It keeps asking questions to avoid silence, keeps solving problems to avoid presence. You end up mistaking clarity for peace when they were never the same thing. Carl Jung warned that one-sided consciousness always ends in collapse. When the intellect grows too powerful, it starts to consume everything, even the parts of you meant to balance it. Emotion becomes weakness, intuition becomes superstition, and the body becomes just a vessel to carry your thoughts around. You become top-heavy, living entirely from the neck up. The mind becomes so developed that the rest of you starves. Eventually, the imbalance creates a kind of spiritual vertigo, a dizziness born from knowing too much and feeling too little. And in that state, you lose your grounding in life itself. The first casualty is wonder. When everything must be explained, nothing feels sacred. You stop looking at the sky with awe because you already know it's just gas and gravity. You stop feeling the mystery in music because you can name the notes. Even love becomes predictable, a chemical pattern, a psychological need. You start dissecting beauty until there's nothing left to feel. And the tragedy is, you think this is maturity. You think detachment is wisdom. But real wisdom has warmth in it. It breathes. When you kill wonder in the name of reason, you don't become enlightened. You just become numb. Eventually, meaning starts to slip through your fingers. You think about life instead of living it. You describe sunsets instead of watching them. You analyze happiness instead of allowing it. Thought becomes a filter that separates you from experience, like glass between you and the world. You can see everything clearly but touch nothing directly. You start to feel like a spectator in your own story. Sharp, articulate, but strangely hollow. The mind's language becomes louder than life's. And when you try to reach for meaning, all you find are definitions. But meaning isn't something you understand. It's something you feel. And when feelings are ignored long enough, they eventually revolt. One day, a quiet sadness breaks through your defenses, or a sudden anger you can't explain. The emotions you've labeled and filed away begin to demand to be felt. You can't reason with them. They speak in another language. It's raw, wordless, ancient. You might cry without knowing why, or feel restless for no reason at all. It's not weakness. It's balance trying to return. The parts you've silenced are knocking on the door, reminding you that the heart has its own intelligence, one the mind was never meant to replace. Then comes the crisis. You've done everything right. You've built a life that looks successful from the outside. Maybe you're respected, stable, even admired. But somehow it all feels empty. You've collected answers, but none of them touch what's missing. The success feels like a story someone else wrote for you. You can explain your feelings perfectly, but can't escape them. That's the quiet collapse, when the intellect reaches its limit and meaning refuses to obey logic. It's the moment when you realize you've climbed a mountain that was never yours to climb. After that collapse, something simpler begins to call to you. You start craving quiet moments, a walk without headphones, a conversation without purpose, a sunset without commentary. You long for things that can't be measured or mastered. You miss the simplicity you once dismissed as foolish. You start to wonder if wisdom isn't about having more thoughts, but fewer and truer. Maybe the point isn't to build a perfect philosophy, but to find the courage to live without one. In simplicity, there's a kind of peace that intellect can't produce because it doesn't come from control but surrender. And when logic finally breaks down, a strange thing happens. The mind that once demanded answers grows silent. You stop asking why and start listening to what is. You realize that not everything has to make sense to be real, and not everything real needs to be understood. The hunger for certainty dissolves into something softer, acceptance. You start to see that the soul doesn't speak in conclusions. It speaks in moments. The ache for meaning was never meant to be solved. It was meant to be felt. And when you finally stop trying to explain it, it stops feeling like pain and starts feeling like life. In that silence, a whisper rises from somewhere deeper, a voice you had forgotten. It doesn't argue or instruct. It simply reminds you that you are more than your mind. Jung called it the unconscious, the hidden half of the self that waits patiently to be heard. It speaks through dreams, intuitions, coincidences, subtle invitations toward wholeness. It doesn't demand understanding, only attention. And maybe that's where the war ends, not with victory, but with reunion. When a mind finally bows to meaning, and you realize they were never enemies, only halves of the same soul, waiting to remember each other. Every journey toward healing begins with a meeting, not with someone else, but with the part of yourself you've spent years avoiding. Jung called it the shadow, the side of you that hides everything inconvenient, unflattering, or painful. It's the anger you suppress, the jealousy you deny, the need you pretend you've outgrown. You think rejecting it makes you pure, but it only makes you divided. The shadow doesn't disappear because you ignore it. It waits. It shows up in the people you dislike, the things that trigger you, the mistakes that keep repeating. Meeting the shadow isn't about becoming darker. It's about becoming whole. You start to notice it most clearly through what Jung called projection. The things you condemn in others often reveal the truths you haven't faced in yourself. The arrogance that irritates you, the vulnerability that makes you uncomfortable, the confidence that makes you jealous, all are mirrors. Each reflection says, "Look closer." It's not an accusation, but an invitation. When you stop defending your self-image long enough to see what's being shown to you, life becomes a teacher instead of a battlefield. The people who annoy you become mirrors instead of enemies. And in that reflection, you begin to see yourself. Not who you pretend to be, but who you are. Pain becomes part of that reflection too. It stops feeling like punishment and starts to feel like communication. Pain is how the psyche gets your attention when you've gone too far from yourself. Every ache, every emptiness, every heartbreak is a message disguised as discomfort. It's not there to break you. It's there to bring you home. When you stop fighting it, you realize pain isn't the opposite of peace. It's the doorway to it. It's the body saying, listen. The heart saying, feel. The soul saying, return. Healing begins the moment you stop asking, why me, and start asking, what is this showing me? In that shift, suffering turns into meaning. Somewhere along the way, you find a younger version of yourself, the child you left behind. Jung believed this inner child holds the key to vitality, imagination, and joy. It's the part of you that once laughed without reason, trusted without evidence, and dreamed without permission. Over time, you buried that child under expectations and intellect. You learned to be responsible, rational, serious, and somewhere in that process, you forgot how to play. But that playful spirit never died. It just hid. When you reconnect with it, you feel a softness return, a gentleness toward life. You remember that growth isn't only about discipline. It's also about wonder. As you travel deeper, you discover the dance between two forces, logos and eros, mind and heart, reason and feeling. For most intelligent people, logos has dominated. It brings order, clarity, and logic, but without eros, it turns sterile. Eros is what gives thought its warmth, what makes logic humane. It's the bridge between knowledge and compassion. Wholeness isn't about choosing one over the other. It's about balance. When logos and eros move together, intellect becomes empathy and feeling becomes wisdom. You stop needing to choose between thinking and feeling because both now serve something higher, understanding. At some point, the mask begins to crack. The persona, that polished identity of the intelligent one, the calm observer, the rational thinker, starts to feel heavy. You begin to see how much energy it takes to maintain an image. Every smile calculated, every word measured, every emotion filtered through self-control. Eventually, you realize that authenticity costs less than performance. Dropping the mask isn't an act of weakness. It's an act of relief. You stop performing intelligence and start living it, quietly, naturally, without needing to prove it. The need to appear wise gives way to the freedom to simply be. And when that mask falls, mystery returns. You stop trying to dissect every experience and start letting life surprise you again. The unknown no longer feels like a threat, but a friend. You notice the poetry in ordinary things, the way light hits a window, the way someone's laugh changes the air. You stop seeking meaning as something to capture and start seeing it as something that's always been here, waiting for you to notice. Control fades, curiosity returns, and the world feels alive again. Not because it changed, but because you did. In Jung's language, this renewal often comes from reconnecting with the feminine within, what he called the anima. It's not about gender, but energy. The anima brings sensitivity, intuition, and emotional depth, qualities many intelligent men were taught to suppress. To embrace them is to rediscover a lost half of the self. You start to listen more than you lecture, to feel before you analyze, to let intuition guide where intellect hesitates. You realize that true strength doesn't come from knowing everything, but from being open enough to be moved by what you don't. And in that openness, you find a new kind of strength, gentle, steady, and unforced. You stop chasing confidence and start embodying calm. The old version of strength was about endurance. This one is about presence. You don't need to dominate life anymore. You just need to meet it honestly. Vulnerability becomes your quiet power. You stop performing toughness and start practicing truth. And that truth feels stronger than any armor you've ever worn. Eventually, you realize there's nothing left to fix. The war inside quiets. The mind and heart are no longer fighting for dominance. They've learned to listen to each other. The intellect has softened, the emotions have matured, and the self feels less like a battlefield and more like a home. Wholeness isn't a grand achievement. It's a gentle return. It's sitting in silence without needing to escape it. It's feeling ordinary moments as sacred again. You stop wanting to be exceptional and start wanting to be whole. And in that wholeness, you finally understand. Peace was never hiding in the world. It was waiting inside you, beneath the noise, quietly asking to be remembered. There was a time when happiness didn't need to be earned. It wasn't a checklist or a reward. It was simply there, in sunlight through the window, in laughter that didn't need a reason, in the way we existed without analyzing ourselves. Somewhere along the way, we traded that simplicity for understanding. We started studying joy instead of feeling it. The mind got louder and the heart went quiet. But the truth is, happiness never really left. It just waits for us to stop searching and notice it again, in the silence between thoughts. We spend so much of life trying to predict and control everything, believing that safety lies in knowing. But what if freedom actually hides in the unknown? The moments we can't plan often hold the deepest beauty. Uncertainty can be terrifying, but it's also alive. When we stop trying to define every outcome, life becomes softer, almost playful again. Maybe the point was never to master the mystery, but to dance with it, to let curiosity replace control and faith replace fear. Stillness isn't the absence of movement. It's the art of being fully here. In stillness, we meet the truth that busyness had buried. The heart speaks softly, but it's hard to hear over constant noise. When we slow down, we realize that peace isn't found in doing more, but in doing less, sometimes in doing nothing at all. It's in sitting quietly, watching a thought come and go, and realizing you don't have to follow it anywhere. Stillness doesn't solve your problems. It changes how you see them. The world taught us to chase perfection, but awareness is what actually makes life beautiful. Presence doesn't need polish. It needs honesty. To be here, fully, even when it's messy, that's real mastery. The pursuit of perfection steals the softness from living. Awareness gives it back. It's not about becoming flawless, but about noticing the small things, the warmth of your breath, the sound of rain, the quiet between words. In presence, even imperfection feels sacred. And in that quiet noticing, joy returns on its own. Happiness rarely comes in grand gestures. It hides in the little rituals that ask for nothing. The first sip of coffee, the hum of a familiar song, the kindness of a stranger. Small joys are what hold the soul together when the world feels too heavy. We keep waiting for something big to save us, but maybe the saving happens every day in how we pause, breathe, and smile without reason. Those tiny, fleeting moments remind us that joy isn't something to chase. It's something we allow ourselves to feel. Some souls don't crave crowds. They crave connection that feels alive. The company of depth doesn't need many words. It's the friend who listens without fixing you, the silence that feels safe, the gaze that says, "I see you." Meaningful companionship isn't about being entertained. It's about being understood. In a world obsessed with constant interaction, depth becomes rare and therefore sacred. When we find those few who see beyond our surface, we rediscover a kind of peace that solitude alone can't provide. Feeling deeply is not weakness, it's courage. The heart's language is emotion, yet most of us were taught to mute it. But numbness isn't strength, it's armor. Real courage is sitting with your sadness without rushing to escape it, letting your joy overflow without guilt, and allowing yourself to be human without apology. When we give ourselves permission to feel, we become alive again. Not perfect, not composed, but real. And in that rawness, we find the beginnings of healing. We were taught that success was a summit, a place we'd arrive at once we'd proven ourselves. But success that empties the soul isn't success at all. True success feels quiet, grounded, not in applause, but in peace. It's when your mind finally rests and you realize you don't have to become someone else to be enough. Maybe success isn't about climbing higher, but sinking deeper into presence, gratitude, and simplicity. The kind that can't be measured, only felt. At some point, wonder returns, not as a loud revelation, but as a gentle reawakening. You start noticing again how light dances on a wall, how silence hums with life, how ordinary moments hold quiet magic. The world hasn't changed. Your eyes have. You stop asking for meaning and start seeing it everywhere. The child within, the one who once marveled at everything, slowly opens their eyes again, smiling as if whispering, "You made it back." And maybe that's the whole secret. Happiness was never something to achieve, but something we forgot how to receive. It waits quietly between one thought and the next, in the pauses, in the breath, in the being. The final whisper isn't a conclusion, but an invitation to stop searching for joy like it's somewhere else. Because it isn't. It's here, now, in the stillness you almost overlooked. And when you finally stop trying to hold it, happiness holds you instead.